I'm gonna leave that up for a second because that's gonna cause some. I don't have timestamps here, but I'm gonna let some of this play right here. Everybody's saying it was excellent.
I mean, it's crazy. Like, there's literally one street that cuts the whole city in half. And like, there's one street, and everything north of that is black and very low income and hood, and south of that is not only white but it's extremely wealthy. And I grew up just about a mile north of that line, and grew up really just seeing a lot of those urban dynamics. But I actually grew up in church, in a church that was south of that line, and it was predominantly white. And so I always just, it was a church that actually came into my community to reach, so to speak, people in the hood. And so it really, that's even for myself what how I really grew up in a very kind of a like white centric Christianity, and that was my context for Christianity as a whole. And I would even try to bring other people from my community to church, and a lot of folks wouldn't want to go because they wouldn't feel themselves reflected in my church, which was understandable. And even a lot of the churches that were in our community that were predominantly black didn't really connect with the young people or with the hip hop generation or hip hop or hood culture. That a lot of the folks that were in the churches, even in my community, were not people that lived in the community, but came in on Sunday morning and then left again Sunday afternoon. And so, whether it was a white church or a black church, a lot of people in my community, a lot of my peers did not feel that the church was a place that they could go or feel felt or seen or feel heard and feel reflected in terms of their culture. And so that's really what engendered in me from a very young age this passion to share the gospel, but in a way that's relevant and contextual to people, so that people can really understand that becoming a Christian and following Jesus is not a rejection of who you are culturally. It's not something that, it's not a sense to where you have to check your identity at the door, but that actually, to the contrary, Jesus is the fulfillment of your identity, and in fact brings you deeper into your identity, culturally speaking, into your people. And that's really that experience.
Wait a minute, y'all heard what he just said? That Jesus will bring you into your identity? Let me just let that go.
Experience growing up is really what had really instilled that in me. But even like when I went into school, theology school and all that kind of stuff, and God gave me the opportunity to travel and go throughout the world, I realized two things. Number one, I was introduced to, even deeper ways that Christianity is presented as this white man's religion, even more so than when I was growing up in my small, in my, just in the microcosm of my church. But even the way I was taught theology in some of the top Christian schools and was exposed to some of the leading theologians, it was in this very whitewashed way where black or brown contributions to the faith were diminished or were just not included at all. And so it made me even more wonder, well, where is my people? Where's my community at in this whole thing that we call Christianity or theology? But then also, as I traveled and interact with other people or groups and contexts, I came to see that this dynamic is not only something that is plaguing my community of the urban African American um, context, but this is really something that's all over the world, that people all over the planet are dealing with, that people have been oppressed also by people who claim to be Christians. And because of that, there is this rejection of Christianity, and there's this perception that Christianity is a white man's religion, a Western religion, it's an American religion, whatever word they want to use to call it, whether you're in Asia or the Middle East or Africa or among indigenous peoples in North or South America, that this is the number one reason, hands down, why people reject Christianity, is because they see it as a Western white man's religion, and they see it as, to accept Christianity is to reject my people, my identity. And it's the same in a different way, in different variations, but at the same time, it's the same dynamic that I saw growing up, where again, people see Christianity as, it's like it's a choice between following Jesus or being a part of your people. And that's not really a choice that anybody really has to make. But because of the westernization of Christianity, people are made to feel that they have to make that decision, especially non-white people are made to feel that they have to make that decision. And so that's really what got me into this when I first, I think people know a lot of that, and people are starting to unpack a lot of, or people say like deconstruct or decolonize their theology. And when I went to seminary after my initial education in undergrad, I was also very interested in books and readings about, again, about the just the diversity of the body of Christ, and racial reconciliation and decolonized theology, and contextualized theology, like owning the gospel according to one's own people. I was really just reading a lot of books about that, and I still do. But one of the things that uh, was, maybe I could say, incomplete about a lot of those conversations is that it all of it is kind of in the modern period, and it's kind of in response to what has been done over the last, millennia and a half in the name of Christianity by Western people to people of color. And then now there's this sense of, we have, people of color receive Christianity through colonialism and slavery, and now have to disentangle and come away from that imperialist, colonialist, white supremacist vision of Christianity. And again, that's all very necessary. But when I first took a class on the early church in Africa, that really drew me, because I was like, okay, that's a whole nother level right there, because it's not, in that case, it's not just about disentangling Western supremacist Christianity, because it's a Christianity that developed even before westernized Christianity. So it didn't have to disentangle or decolonize. It wasn't post-colonial theology. It was what I like to call a colonial theology. Like, there was no colonization. And that, I felt like, is a missing piece of the conversation, because there are Christians who, of color, Christians in Africa and in Asia, and their descendants are still around today, who they did not receive Christianity through colonialism and slavery. And in fact, their Christianity preceded European Christianity. So for them, it's not only a reaction to imperialism, but it's something that precedes. And I think that is really important. That's what also drew me to that, for two reasons. Number one, because it's a missing part of the story. And even for people who reject Christianity because they see it as a Western or white man's religion, if you try to say, well, yeah, but look at the fact that there's, like, now most of the Christians in the world are actually in Africa, or in Asia, or in Latin America, and in Europe, and in the white community in North America, Christianity is declining. Even if you put out those facts, somebody can still reject it and say, well, yeah, but it came from the white man. And so all those Christians in Africa and Asia and Latin America, most of them are like, they are part of European denominations, and they historically got it from Europeans through colonialism. So they can still reject it for that reason. It still came from the West. So that early history helps correct that misconception, to show that, well, not every Christian of color got Christianity through slavery and colonialism. There's a lot of people who got it that was even before slavery and colonialism. And that's number one. But number two,
I want to be frank. White folk ain't have Christianity first. Let me just tell y'all that right now. Anybody attempting to tell y'all that is deceived. White folk did not have Christianity first. They were not the first ones to have Christianity. Let's make sure we get that established first. Because if we don't get that established, we're going to get this conscious woke garbage that everybody's on social media talking about, that we got this thing from white folk. They weren't first to have it. Rome wasn't the first church. Let me call Bruce. I got Bruce's number right here. I'm a bother these folk early. Matter of fact, it's afternoon. I'm going to start bothering these folk. Because everybody wants to start talking about Catholicism. Rome was the main enemies of the cross in the beginning, and God's people. So let's establish that. All right, let's keep going. Now that we got that established.
is it also just helps us imagine a faith, a hymeneut, right? To use the Ethiopian word, it imagines a hymeneut, a faith in Christ that is free from colonialism and slavery. It's outside of that, and it's not only reacting to that, and it helps to inspire us as we are continuing. Those of us who did, or our ancestors did, have to deal with an enslaving colonial expression of so-called Christianity. It can help us to take off those shackles of mental slavery and imagine a theology, a hymeneut, and a faith, and a way of doing worship in church that is free from and beyond the shackles of colonial Christianity. So that's really what kind of got me into it.
Yeah, that's one thing I respect a lot about your work is the concept of decolonizing the Christianity, but also having a cultural understanding for Christianity from an African perspective and owning the gospel from that concept and whatnot. Like you, I'm biracial. My father's from Alabama. He was a
Oh, I'm glad. Shout out to Moore. I'm glad Moore bringing that out because a lot of people don't know. Like y'all talk about guerrilla Hebrew and all of that. We got being biracial or whatever. Vince Bantu, the same thing. More the same thing. I'm glad he even bringing that up right there.
he grew up Baptist. He was an ordained minister. My mother is from Mexico. She grew up Catholic, etc. And my father, he would always tell me that he believed that we had a strong connection to Ethiopia and Cush and Sheba in the Bible, etc. Whatnot, right? And so
I'm going to bring up Bishop McKinley and Cush and all of that. Y'all, I'm going to bring up some stuff you folk don't want to hear. Listen to this now. Now, listen to this now. Now, listen to this good one right here. Y'all know this good brethren right here. Part of them folk. Comeback King said, but who here is following African orthodoxy? I ask you, what's the difference between African orthodoxy and a non-denominational Christian in this good, great country we call America? I ask you that right there.
I always had that.
Oh, I see you. Appreciate you, Elder Jeff. Appreciate you. Oh man, you had him going the other day with that comment for fair use.
A picture in my head, but what shocked me, right, was about 15 years ago. I got to go see. I went to go see the Lucy exhibit with my best friend. But to get to the Lucy exhibit, we had to walk through a history of Ethiopia. And as soon as you walked in, you see Axumite pillars and all kind of stuff. And then I got to see the pictures of an Ethiopian looking Jesus on the cross, saints, angels, gold coins, all kind of stuff, the language. And I was floored. Like I'm not ashamed to say as a grown man, I almost started getting teary eyed in the joint because I recognized how colonized my mind still was, that I didn't even understand that this existed or whatnot. And it immediately re-terraformed my brain into understanding I need to check out history from a different perspective. I need to look and see how I actually connect to this. Because immediately when I saw the history of it, I was like, wow, it would seem via proximity that I would have closer connection to this than maybe another form of Christianity and whatnot, right? Not to put another form down or say one's better than the other. I'm just saying, like, in terms of a cultural context, I might have more connection to this and whatnot, right? So to that end, sir, I would love to get into the questions and whatnot. Right off rip, first question being, how and when did Christianity reach Ethiopia?
Yeah. Well, when we're talking about Ethiopia, there, we had to be careful. I'll give maybe two answers because there's a traditional answer among the Ethiopian church that Christianity, well, actually monotheism came to Ethiopia through, Judaism and the belief in Yahweh came through the connection between the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon back in the 10th century BCE. And from that time on, Ethiopians were
honestly talking good. But I want to know if y'all really understand that honestly is saying, honestly, you in the crib, honestly is saying that belief that Christianity is white is actually supporting white supremacy. Y'all believe in the lie and preaching the lie. You got woke folk out here that's supporting the lie that Christianity is the white man's religion. That come from the white man, and the white man was the first one to have it. Y'all promoting the white lie. Unbelievable. And these supposed to be woke folk talking about do your research.
monotheistic and worshipped and practiced Jewish practices. And then the next step in the progression of Christianity in Ethiopia, according to the traditional narrative, is that the Ethiopian eunuch mentioned in Acts chapter 8, who became a Christian, came back.
He said right down the street. I understand what you're saying. He says right down the street from the Levant.
And spread Christianity and the gospel to an Ethiopia that was already practicing Judaism, according to that traditional narrative. And then in the 4th century, in the 300s, there was a missionary named Frumentius who actually was born and raised as a slave in Ethiopia. He was from Syria, and him and his brother were raised as slaves in Ethiopia, and they were also Christians, and they introduced the sacraments, and they really introduced the ecclesiastical structure and the liturgy into Ethiopia, and created the connection between Ethiopia and the Egyptian church. Now, when you talk about I guess the more like historical or scholarly view of that question, it would be different in the sense that, and this is the view I would take with respect to the tradition and the Ethiopian church and the Ethiopian tradition. The view I would take on that is that actually the 300s was when Christianity started as a whole in Ethiopia, especially we would say when it became a Christian nation.
Yes, I don't think a lot of people understand that it doesn't really make a difference that many would say, but among the earliest images of Christ are of a darker hue. All right, listen to Pastor Jay right here. He said it's foolish to think any faith originated from any human man, whether black or white. Faiths are concerning the unseen realm, and these origins come from the spirit world, but the spirit world has to speak to somebody. The spirits had a spirit had to speak to Abraham, a spirit had to speak to Adam. So did the spirit come to Adam in a European Adam? That's where the thing come in. We can't get so deep, Pastor J, that we can't. Adam had to be a color. Y'all ain't that deep. Y'all ain't that deep that y'all don't know who robbed you. The cop want a description. You gonna give a description. Who snatched the little kids and put them in a van? What the van look like? What the people look like? And we got to talk about that. We can get spiritual all we want to, but it had to come to a people. And Rome were Roman people, Italian people weren't the people that this thing came to. That's all we bringing out. And there's nothing wrong with that's not that. And that's not me having hatred towards Italian people, but they're not the ones that received this. They use.
Now, there very likely could have been Christians in Ethiopia before the 300s, especially given how active Ethiopia was in the Red Sea trade, the Indian Ocean trade, and also with the Roman Empire and Persian empires. They were right, it was right on the Red Sea, and it was really like at a crossroads of the ancient world. So it's very likely that there could have been Christians earlier. In fact, there are texts from we're not exactly sure, but anywhere between the 5th up until the 10th century of Ethiopia that actually claim that Frumentius, that missionary I mentioned, that when he began to build the church in Ethiopia, there were already Christians present. And that very well may have been the case. But the reason that I would respectfully disagree with the traditional account, and even again, many Ethiopian scholars themselves would also see it differently, is that there's no evidence archaeologically of monotheism in Ethiopia from before the time of the Common Era. In fact, there's evidence to the contrary, that Ethiopians were still practicing polytheistic religions. And then also when we talk about the Ethiopian eunuch, the Ethiopian eunuch was not likely Ethiopian in the sense of from the place that we now call Ethiopia, but the word Ethiopian in Greek just means black. And so
Yeah, that's another thing. Even when we look at the Bible, outside of Israel, Egypt, Ethiopia, Egypt and Ethiopia, y'all know that's both Africa, right? Africa is mentioned more times than any other nation. Any other nation in the entire Bible outside of Israel, the second runner-ups are Egypt and Ethiopia being mentioned.
So what Luke was saying in Acts chapter 8 was that the eunuch was black. And it says he was a eunuch of Candace, which is actually the title of the queens of Nubia or Cush. And so that eunuch who was black, which again, Ethiopia just means black. So it would actually be better to translate that as that Philip met a black eunuch. And because again, at that time, if you were in Ethiopia, it wouldn't have called it Ethiopia. They didn't call themselves Ethiopia. They called themselves Agaze or Habesha, and the capital city was Axum. And so it's also referred to as the Axumite Empire, but they wouldn't have called themselves Ethiopia at that time because that was a Greek word that later, much later, Ethiopians began to adopt for themselves. And so that eunuch again would have been from Nubia. So he would have, who became a Christian, would have went back to Nubia and not Ethiopia. And so again, that's why I would say that The story of Frumentius, though, there's a lot of evidence, both from outside of Ethiopia. There are a lot of different church historians that talk about this, Rufinus and Sozomen and Socrates Scholasticus, but also internally. This is when we start to see internal evidence of Christianity in Ethiopia from King Ezana. King Ezana was the king of Ethiopia who was evangelized by this Syrian slave, Frumentius, and Ezana became a Christian and freed Frumentius, but Frumentius didn't want to go back to Syria. He actually wanted to stay in Ethiopia to build the church, and he created a connection with Athanasius, who was the Pope of Egypt at that time, and that was how Ethiopia came under the Egyptian church. And Ezana commissioned tablets to be written in the Ethiopian language that talk about his faith in Jesus Christ and in the Father and Son and Holy Spirit. And also there are coins from Ethiopia from this time period from Ezana with his face with Christian crosses on them. And there was recently a church, the foundations of a church that was discovered, the oldest church in sub-Saharan Africa, which was found in Ethiopia just a few years ago, and a publication done about it recently. And this church was also from the 300s, from that same time period. So the 300s, the mid 300s, like 330s, 340s, around the time of King Ezana, that would have been the time when Ethiopia or Habesha or Agazi, as it was called then, would have become a Christian empire.
Very interesting information. Very interesting. Next question, though. I've heard Dr. Ephraim Isaac describe Ethiopian Christianity as the most Jewish form of Christianity. Would you say that's an accurate description? And if so, what would be the so-called Jewish practices thereof?
Man, more talking good. Good. These some good questions. Now let's listen to this answer. Because what we don't want to do is come and bang on folk over here that's practicing stuff that them folk over there doing, and we calling what they doing heretical, but we ain't saying what they do in Ethiopia is heretical. Same thing if Dr. Brown don't want a Christmas tree, our light-skinned brethren, Dr. Brown, if he don't want a Christmas tree, I can't come and bang on folk over here that don't want a Christmas tree. Let's hear what's being said.
Yeah. I would say definitely. I would agree with him on that. And you know, Dr. Isaac is saying that even as an Ethiopian Jew himself, and not as a Christian, and so he would understand that there's a Jewish community that he belongs to that have been in Ethiopia. The Falasha people and also the Beta Israel are Ethiopian Jewish communities that have been in Ethiopia, but also in Israel and throughout the diaspora in the world. There are many Ethiopian Jews who identify as Hebrew and are Jewish, and even other further south in Africa. You have the Lemba tribe in Zimbabwe that may have migrated from Ethiopia. We're not sure, but there are Jewish communities all over different parts of Africa long before the colonial period, and also because of
different Jewish communities throughout Africa. I'm gonna bring that other pastor back up that was talking about there's no connection and his other nonsense. A lot of stuff is from ignorance. People just simply don't. Some people just simply don't know. And then he said, "Well, I know some of y'all would want to know who are the Jewish people. The Jewish people are the people in the land." That's going against the book when the Bible talks about a scattering. So from some of my Christian brothers and sisters, it's coming pure nonsense. I said pure nonsense. Just Berean talking. You just don't know the history. You just don't know. But now the thing is, being it's a popular conversation, do you go and study it, or do you just come out here and just start talking about it and click Hebrew or click African Jew or just put something in the title just because you want to get into the conversation? Don't come in and mess up. Don't come in and mess up, please.
Because of this strong Jewish presence in Ethiopia. And I would also say because the Ethiopian language, the ancient form of the language called Ge'ez, is a Semitic language. And, so it's related to Arabic or Hebrew or Syriac. And because of that Semitic cultural connection, and also because of the presence of Jewish communities in Ethiopia.
No, I'm not even talking about Richardson. I'm talking about the guy that I played, Apostle. I don't know if you were on here, Red Letter. I played Apostle the other day. I see he got a video, Who Are the Edomites? I might play that and terrorize y'all a little bit, but he looked like he just started a channel. I think he got 10 subscribers now, but he's out here talking. He's talking some stuff, and it's just not lining up with what with what's established out here. And I don't want folk to be in denial. I think some folk are in some type of denial, but I'm not going to lie. That Richardson thing, I thought when Richardson came on, it was going to be something. Shout out to Fervent Charity. He hit me the next day. He said, "Is this a primary source right here?" And Richardson was talking that talk, and he was blowing shots, and he grabbed. I was thinking about that last night. Then he grabbed that cup. He was drinking a latte. He was drinking something, and he took a sip out that straw. Like, boy, I'm blowing at y'all. We ain't seen him. Somebody go find Damon Richardson for me. That wasn't a good look. You can't come blowing. Don't go give no backup information. I know you want to wait a little while. Maybe you wanted to wait a little while before you get, but that was not a good look right there. That was not a good look. Fair use. This Berean talking.
Ethiopia. And I would say lastly, because Ethiopia was a Christian nation, but it was an independent nation. And so it was not under the Roman Empire, like, for example, Egyptians were, or North Africans, like where Tertullian and Augustine were from, or Perpetuum Felicity. They were, Ethiopia was independent. And so I would argue that their political independence, but also the fact they were a Christian empire, freed them up to develop their own indigenous expressions of Christianity that were not beholden to the same kinds of anti-Semitic dynamics that were happening in the Roman Empire. The Romans, even before Christianity, were very anti-Semitic, and I mean they were at war with the Jews, and so even many Roman Christians adopted a lot of anti-Semitic rhetoric that characterized so much of early Roman Christianity and then later Western European Christianity.
And that's one of the keys right there, because you can get involved in apologetics and be defending, but you ain't showing that there was an anti-Semitism that was among the people from the earliest of times. Way before the Inquisition. Y'all talking about Hitler and all this garbage, and y'all talking about Inquisition and all this garbage, Nazi Germany, 1940s and all that. Way before that Christianity started, that beef started with them Romans, them Italians against them Jewish people, or who you would call Israelites. It's been beef. It's been beef, long time beef. I'm glad he's bringing this out. How many people involved in apologetic, when you hear say that, because they want to defend everything, quote unquote, Christian. Everything, let me tell y'all, everything in Christianity can be defended. I wish I had a table to bang on. I wish I had a table to bang on right now. Everything in Christianity, everything that Christians have done or done in the name of Christianity cannot be defended. And I'm not finna put all of it on sweet Jesus. Fair use. And we need more teachers that's honest, that's just going to put it, that's a buck. They're going to keep it a buck and put it on the table. You ain't got to defend everything. I ain't got to defend everything. The death, burial, and resurrection, that's the thing to save me. I ain't got to defend the behavior, how these folk raising offerings, what they name slave ships. I ain't got to defend all of that stuff, prayer lines. I ain't got to defend rolling on the ground cover. I ain't got to defend all of that stuff. A lot of that stuff ain't even the book. Matter of fact, let me stop this video and show y'all some of this stuff, y'all, this nonsense y'all got going on in Africa. This nonsense y'all got going, look like voodoo dolls, y'all spinning and got the people spinning. None of this stuff is Bible. It's too much stuff going on in Christianity that ain't Bible. Not all of Christianity, but some stuff is done in the name of Christianity that just ain't Bible. And some of it is straight voodoo. And I'm going to show y'all it's voodoo in the occult. Now I'm going to have to show y'all how much I done studied Aleister Crowley. I'm going to show you what these preachers doing, and I'm going to show you something. I'm going to show you we're going to read the words of Aleister Crowley coming into the occult and see if what the preachers doing is what Aleister Crowley doing with the people. Got them spinning, got them tripping. You tapping your neck and they tapping their neck and all this nonsense. Voodoo nonsense and garbage. It's okay.
Again, going all the way to the 20th century with the Holocaust. But in Ethiopia, it wasn't like that. And so there was much more of a desire to actually embrace a lot of the aspects of Judaism. And I would say another factor to why it is such a heavily Jewish, you could say Judaized, form of Christianity is also because of the fact that there are biblical books that only are in the Ethiopian canon. Especially the famous ones are the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, that were likely originally written in Hebrew, but only survive in Ge'ez and are only used in the world of Christendom, are only canonical in the Ethiopian church. And these are also part of the Deuterocanon or the expanded Old Testament that include lots of regulations and rules and about Torah observance. And so there's so many aspects of it. I mean, the fact that also the Ethiopians claim that they have the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia, that was a tradition that started with the Keber Nagash, which was a book that was written in the 1300s CE that tells the story about how the Queen of Sheba had a son with Solomon who brought the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia, and they claim it's still there to this day. And again, that raises a lot of questions. People doubt whether that's the case. But regardless of whether or not the Ark of the Covenant is actually in Ethiopia, the idea that it is has engendered a strong sense of affinity with Hebrew culture and language and religious traditions. And so even with that, but also the fact that even in Ethiopian Christianity, there's a much stronger emphasis on the Old Testament as well as the New, and much more, say, for example, in Western Christianity, and even in churches, right? I mean, we mentioned Dr. Isaac, who's an Ethiopian Jew, but even among Ethiopian Christians, there still is a lot of Jewish emphasis. I mean, one example is that in every Ethiopian church, there is a what's called a makdas, which is literally means like the holy, right? The holy of holies behind the altar where the Eucharist, or the querban, as is in the word in Ethiopian or in Ge'ez, is offered. And so even the structure of churches in many ways is mirroring the temple or the tabernacle in the Old Testament. And there's many other examples, but absolutely I would agree with that it's a very probably the most Jewish flavor. But also I want to add that it's done in a very Ethiopian way, because Ethiopians themselves are a part of the Jewish community. And so there's a unique Ethiopian flavor to the Judaism and to the Christianity with its own strong Jewish flavor.
Yeah, two quick follow-ups on that. I do believe in one of the talks you gave with Jude 3, I heard another brother on stage mention the fact that the Ethiopian Christians were in Europe talking about the fact that in like the 1500s, 1600s, something like that, talking about that they were explaining to people that they circumcise and they follow dietary laws, etc., because they believe that's what first century Christians did. Do I have that correct or no?
Yeah, that's that's my understanding as well. So I think that I would say that's correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And real quick, a quick follow-up to potentially clear up some potential misinformation floating around the conscious community. There's a lot of Hebrew Israelites that say that they believe that Jerusalem is in South Africa, Jerusalem is in Ethiopia, Jerusalem's in West Africa. Do you know of anything in the Ethiopic codex of literature that, or oral traditions that specifies that Jerusalem is in Ethiopia or in Africa anywhere?
Absolutely not. And there's actually a lot of evidence to the contrary of that. That again, even for example, the text that I mentioned, the Keber Nagash, which is from the 14th century, the 1300s CE, it tells the story of the again the Queen of Sheba and Solomon, and it actually tells a story about their son Menelik, who actually later on went from Ethiopia up to Jerusalem. And there's no sense, again, they're talking about him going from Ethiopia to Jerusalem, through the Arabian Peninsula and through Egypt. And so there's no sense whatsoever in Ethiopian sources themselves that indicate that Jerusalem is actually in Africa, because they describe Jerusalem as another place. And around that same time, when the Keber Nagash was written,
And now anybody that's saying Jerusalem is in, oh boy, serious.
There was a whole city that was constructed called Lalibela, and Lalibela was built in as the capital of Ethiopia, and that was right kind of towards the end of the Crusades, like in the 12th century. And Crusades between Islamic forces in the east and Western European Christians in the west. And a big issue in the Crusades was pilgrimage. That's what the Europeans, the excuse they were using for fighting the Crusades was the pilgrims can't go to Jerusalem to visit. And in Ethiopia also did the same thing. They valued pilgrimage to Jerusalem and going to these holy sites from the Bible. But because the Crusades really limited Christians' ability to visit Jerusalem, including even Ethiopians, they built the city of Lalibela to be a Jerusalem in Ethiopia. So that could be because a lot of times in different communities, Hebrews like Kemetic, they will sometimes use like a kernel of truth, but then twist it. And so again, King Lalibela built Lalibela to be like a Jerusalem in Africa, but there was no sense that that actually was Jerusalem, but it was, again, it was to be like a pilgrimage site for Ethiopians if they can't get to Jerusalem. So even the fact that in and of itself shows that Ethiopians themselves did not consider Jerusalem to be in Africa. And constantly any Ethiopian source or text would refer to Jerusalem as a place that's up in the Near East, in the Levant, and not in Africa. So I think that I think it's really important for a lot of these communities who have these ideas and all of that to really. My encouragement to them also is to base their their ideas, and base their theories on primary sources, especially from the context, because a lot of times these different communities will base their claims on Western or white or European sources, which is counterproductive, I think, and contradictory, because they want to celebrate and elevate Black identity and Black sources and Black history. Well, if you actually read Black sources, like from Ethiopia, again, the Cape of Gas is just one of many, that they would claim that Jerusalem is up in the Levant and not in sub-Saharan Africa. So I think these communities should be careful to base their opinions on African sources themselves.
Thank you very much for clearing that up. Very, very much. What are some of the unique aspects of the Ethiopian Christian traditions in terms of biblical canon, literary works, and music?
Yeah, there's so many examples. And we just mentioned about the Bible a minute ago, about how even again the Ethiopian canon is the most unique because it's the biggest. It's the largest biblical canon in all of Christendom, and like other Orthodox and the Catholic canon, it includes the deuterocanonical books, the books that take place during Malachi and Matthew in the last few centuries before the Common Era. But it also includes other books like Jubilees and Enoch that only survive in the Ethiopian language, and also include ideas about angels or watchers, as they're called, and also biblical and additional regulations on, especially in Jubilees, additional regulations on worship and ritual purity and all these other kind of things that make it even more unique. And that feeds into, again, liturgy, and as you said, music. The Ethiopian church has its own style of music called Degwa, which is usually spelled in English as Degwa. And the Degwa music is its own form of music that go back to Saint Yared. And Saint Yared, Yared, he lived in the 6th century, in the 500s, around the time that monasticism came into Ethiopia from a group called the Nine Saints, a group of monks from Syria who introduced Christian monasticism in Ethiopia. And Yared was a monk who was also very musically gifted, and his story his biography tells that he actually was taken up to heaven by the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit revealed to him the Degwa music in 3 distinct modes. So there are 3 modes of music that are still used to this day, that were revealed, according to the story, revealed directly by God, because this style of music and the tones and the melodies of the music were sounds that did not exist in anywhere in creation by people or by animals or anywhere. It was directly given by God to Yared for the Ethiopian people, and this is the style of liturgy and music that is still used even to this day. That incorporates African drums and other forms of instruments. The sistrum, which is a kind of a small cymbal instrument that is still used to this day, 1,500 years later. And again, it is its own unique liturgical music. And then also, when you talk about literary works, there is a lot of different examples of unique forms of Ethiopian literature. Examples I give real quick is, one of them is called a gadla, and a gadla is, the word gadla means struggle in the Ethiopian language in Ge'ez, but it's in the sense of a spiritual struggle, like a struggle over sin and a struggling for righteousness. And it's also a genre of literature where a hero or a saint it'll be their biography, essentially, but it's more than just a biography in the sense of relating facts, but it's like a spiritual biography. They're often written for liturgical purposes, and so this shows the very African, I would say, really united sense of history and worship and storytelling, and also honoring of ancestors, which is also very African value, all come together in this art form that would be used in worship in church, but also to tell the story of ancestors and to honor the ancestors. And so this was a form of literature that is unique to Ethiopian literature, which in and of itself is worth saying that the Ethiopian language called Ge'ez has its own alphabet, and in that way, it is unique. Even to this day, there are a variety of languages in Ethiopia and Eritrea. You got Tigrinya and Tigray and Oromo and Amharic and all these different languages, but they all use the Ethiopian alphabet, which goes back to Ge'ez, which is the mother language of all of the different dialects that survive in East Africa today. And that alphabet that I'm talking about, that is the only writing system in all of sub-Saharan Africa in use today. Almost every other language, and to my knowledge, every other language in sub-Saharan Africa that has a written form it uses European letters, because of the introduction of European missionaries and colonists and things like that, because most of the languages were oral prior to the arrival of Europeans. But Ethiopians had their own alphabet that is unique to Ethiopia. It, again, as I mentioned, it's a Semitic language, but is a unique branch of Semitic that developed right in the Horn of Africa. And even to this day, it is the only writing system in use in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's worth noting that from the beginning of this language, I mean, there was a few inscriptions, like a handful on one hand you could count, before the Christian period that were, before Christianization. But starting in the 300s, you have tablets being written in this language, as I mentioned earlier, giving praise to God. And then the first book written in this language was the Bible. And so again, just to put that another way, just to give the significance of this, the first book written in sub-Saharan Africa was the Bible, was the Christian Bible. And so that just shows how Christianity and African civilization literally go together. And it was written in the indigenous Ethiopian script that is, to this day in the 21st century, the only indigenous alphabet used in the continent of Africa. And it's a Christian language going back to the very beginning. And so this just, I mean, those are just a few examples, but we could go on forever. But yeah, those are just a few. Oh, and I mentioned, I said 2 genres. The other genre of literature I wanted to mention that's also in the Ge'ez language is called a malke. And a malke is another form of poetry that is similar to a gadol, but the malke is basically a poem that has 5-line stanzas. And it also celebrates a saint, because again, like in most parts of Africa, honoring ancestors and venerating ancestors is a big part of the culture. And in the malke, each stanza will actually basically kind of salute or hail a different part of the saint's body. And so like it'll pick a saint. Each malke will be dedicated to a certain saint or hero in the Ethiopian people, and then each stanza will be kind of giving praise to your head, and then it'll just talk about how your head bore the mysteries of the sun, or praise to your hands because your hands worked to build the church, or praise to your feet because your feet ran to spread the gospel, or the bisrat. And so that's kind of how the malkes go. And again, it's a genre of literature and poetry unique to the Ethiopian context, and it was used to give glory to God, first of all, and also to celebrate the leaders of the Ethiopian people. And again, as I said, in a very African way of honoring and remembering ancestors.
Beautiful breakdown. I'm gonna ask this question, then I'm gonna skip a few just so we can get some stuff in before you have to leave or whatnot. But for a lot of people that aren't familiar with how Ethiopian Christianity looks, walks, talks, feels, and all that kind of stuff, what are some of the holy days and religious practices that are unique to Ethiopian Christianity?
Yeah, definitely, man. I mean, I think that there are many days, feast days and holy days that are common to with other Christians as well. So-called Christmas, right, or the Nativity, and or actually, as it's called in Ethiopian, the Gena, which means the birth, or Lidet. Those are both, Gena and Lidet are both Ethiopian words that mean birth, and so that's literally what it's called in that language. And then there's Easter, so to speak, right, again, which is actually a European pagan name, but again, as it's called in the Ethiopian language, it's called the Tinsae, and Tinsae means like literally rising, the resurrection. That's what they call it. And instead of calling it Easter, they call it the Tinsae. And so, there are many days like that are common to the broader Christian world, but the names, again, as I mentioned, are unique, and there are unique traditions that go along with it. And also, for example, in Tinsae, Ethiopians come to church and they will circle around the church in a procession and do other things that are unique to that context. But also, it's also worth pointing out that these holy days are on their own calendar. The Ethiopians have their own calendar. They don't even use the Gregorian or the calendar that, they, in many parts of broader society, because of globalization and colonialism, people will use.
Where Bruce said, I wonder if the Most High God mad Ethiopians got their own calendar. I wonder if the Most High God mad that the Ethiopians got their own calendar. Fair use. You heard what he said about the Bible being the first book printed in sub-Saharan. No, I'm gonna leave that alone because y'all don't like that. Y'all don't like that. Y'all like lies. Now, somebody said, let me say, do y'all remember this brother hemming up Jabari on Sinetta? Absolutely so. And that's one of the things that I've been saying. I said, well, he gave Sinetta that work because he's one of the, you got to give it to him. Him among, I say him and Richardson, the top apologists out there. But that's the thing that I'm saying. He hemmed them up. He giving them this work right there. He giving them this African work. How come they don't got that work for them Israelites on the history? To disprove what they got to say about the history. That's the only thing I find so strange. As a matter of fact, some of the stuff that he's talking about Jewishness in Africa is clearing up some things. But we're gonna leave that alone. I'm not recognized. I don't know nothing. I just be thinking. Because if you got that work, you're gonna give it to the folk. You're gonna put it out there. And when we to be clear, when we talk about that work, we talk about historically. Before Deacon and them take that and talk about there ain't no work to Israelites, man, don't get yourselves confused. Don't get yourselves confused. Berean talk about that history, the history of what's being said. And Deacon ain't got nothing to do with the history. I'm going to keep it a buck. We talk about that history. We talk about Dante. We talk about that history. We talk about Benaiah, Israel. We talk about that history. We talk about Ron Dalton. I'm talking about that history. Zachariah and them ain't got that work, that history. They ain't been putting that out there. They deal with doctrine. The charter, if y'all want to say that charter's history, that's y'all mythical history. Everybody got mythical history. I understand the tradition. So y'all talking about that. Y'all talking about that. I'm talking about that other thing. Now, Gorilla Hebrew went and debated. Well, we done spoke enough on that. They went and debated on Dr. Brown, and y'all claim he gave him that work. I know they got them other rabbis calling this stuff intellectual sewage. Y'all running with this Kalonima stuff. We talk about that history. Let them other dudes do that history. That history ain't y'all. Let them other dudes do that history. I'm dealing with the Christian church, giving them that work with that history. I thought Damon Richardson was going to do it. He even agreed when he came on here. I agree with you, Berean. It need to be a documentary. It need to be something. Folk ain't want to put that bread up. I'm going to tell y'all the truth. The church, that's how I'm coming to the conclusion that historical work, the church ain't got it for the Israelites. They don't want to deal with that. This Berean talking fair use. Take that and twist that up and put that in a fair use.
Use the Western calendar, but they also have their own calendar that many of their feast days will be on. So they don't celebrate Easter and Christmas same time as Westerns do, Western European or Western Christians do, but they have a different date for Lidet and a different date for Tinsai. And then there are other feast days that are similar to other parts of the Christian world, but they go harder on. The hardest holiday that Ethiopians go on is actually the Feast of the Epiphany, which is in other parts of Christendom as well. But in Ethiopia, they go hard for the Feast of the Epiphany, what they call Timket. Timket in Ethiopian languages means baptism. And again, the Feast of
And that's January what? What day is that on?
Epiphany is about Jesus's revelation or epiphany as the Son of God with the Holy Spirit descending upon him in the baptism in the Jordan River. And so Ethiopians will go to sacred rivers and baptize. And again, there's a lot of intersection there with African traditional culture and the significance of water and rivers and the spirits that live within the rivers, and the way that this comes to a fruition in Christian identity with sacred rivers and baptisms, and there's bright colors and festivals and decorations everywhere. And it is the biggest holiday of the year, which I think is interesting because in the Western world, hands down, Christmas is probably the most biggest holiday of the year, and maybe Easter as a second. But in Ethiopia, Timket, the feast of the Epiphany, the feast of the Timket, the baptism of Jesus, that is the number one feast day of the year, where it lasts for like 10 days straight, and it's people just getting lit for Jesus. And so those are just a few examples.
Okay, to make some use of time, I'm going to jump a whole bunch of questions and get into this topic here, because you're pushing me into it and don't even know it. But what do the historical sources say about the spread of Christianity in Central and West Africa? Because this is something that I don't think a lot of people are aware of, and this is something in your work that I found just tremendous to understand.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it was something that that's really actually kind of the main focus of a lot of my work right now, current articles and book that I'm working on that very topic. And that's something that was asked of me, because a lot of as I mentioned, you got these languages and these kingdoms that developed in East Africa, to where Christianity literally produced and gave birth to books and architecture and buildings, and Christianity thoroughly permeated all of East Africa and all of North Africa, and these are the oldest civilizations on the continent. And so again, that's just significant in and of itself when we look at the fact that Christianity was predominant in all of the civilizations of ancient Africa. And so it just cannot be maintained that it was a European imposition or it was a white man's religion, all that kind of stuff. It was already everywhere. But as go into your question, most of the evidence comes from North and East Africa. And that makes sense, because those, again, were the biggest civilizations in Africa in the first millennium, of the Common Era. But then it begs the question of, well, did it spread further west or further south in other places? And I'm currently working in that right now. But I can say right now, be on the lookout for some art, an article that I'm working on, as well as a new book that will be out soon on this very topic. But I can start off to say now that absolutely yes, there are historical sources that indicate that Christians, which were predominant in North and East Africa, that they also began to spread into other parts of Africa. And there is evidence, predominantly in Muslim sources actually, that indicate that there were Christians in Central Africa, in areas that are now part of Western Sudan or modern day Chad, that there were Christians there in the 800s and 900s, which would make sense, because as other civilizations developed in Africa, they were developing through trade and contact with the civilizations that were already there before them in East Africa. So I'm talking about like Songhai and Ghana and Mali and Kaukau and the Congo Kingdom, and then Mapungubwe, also the Swahili coast, which was especially starting to develop during the Islamic slave trade. And as Muslims were spreading throughout the southeastern part of the continent and central and western part, they also noticed that there were Christians that were already there, because Nubia and Ethiopia were still predominantly Christian nations. And even though Egypt was under Islamic control, it was still a large Christian minority that was still there. And it was actually in the case of Mali, for example, King Mansa Musa actually mentioned that there were a whole Christian section in the Mali Empire, which was modern day, not just modern day Mali, but really most of West Africa, the Gold Coast, which is still controlled by Africans before the arrival of Europeans. And also this is outside of the purview of the Islamic slave trade. And Mansa Musa mentioned that there were Christians in the Mali Empire, an entire Christian section. And this is documented in sources from the 12th, 13th, 14th centuries, long before European colonialism. So absolutely, yes, Christians were already present and were spreading all throughout various parts of Africa long before Europeans arrived.
Yeah, I've looked into a lot of the Islamic sources as well, and it's interesting. They paint this complete picture. If you can see Ethiopians going to North Africa and West Africa for trade. You can see even sources going back to, I've read one source talking about there being Christianity in Ghana as far back as the 11th century. But yeah, just to make some quick use of time, because I got to let you go real soon. Do you know of any evidence of African Christianity or Christian practice coming off the slave ships in the Americas?
Yeah, absolutely. There is examples of on the coast of West Africa, through contact with Europeans in Benin and in Senegal. There's evidence of Christian Africans who became Christian through contact, but were independently Christian and were not colonized or forced to be Christians. And there were even kings and rulers in parts of West Africa that chose to adopt Christianity. But the most famous example, and probably the most prevalent example of that, is the Kingdom of the Congo. And the Kingdom of the Congo became a Christian kingdom starting in the hundreds. And again, this was not now this was through contact with Europeans, with the Portuguese in particular. So as far as we know, the Congo did not become Christian because of contact with Ethiopia or Nubia, which would have been further away from where they were, but it was through contact with the Portuguese. But it's important to note that the Portuguese at this time in the 14, 15, and 1600s were not colonizing Congo. And
Shout out to Garfield. I got to give it to Garfield. Garfield said that 5 years ago.
So the Congolese kings heard of Christianity through contact with Portuguese missionaries, and they independently decided to become Christian. And the Congo was a Christian kingdom for several hundred years. And it was an independent Christian kingdom for several hundred years, and even produced some of the earliest West or Central African authors. King Nzinga Mbemba is a great example, who learned Portuguese and wrote in Portuguese. But again, he was an independent monarch in the Congo and was a Christian. And so that's a great source of information also for early West and Central African history in general, but especially Christianity. And to the question about even on the slave ships, many of the King Nzinga Mbemba and many other Congolese kings were trading in the slave trade with Europeans. Now, that's actually one of the things that Nzinga Mbemba addresses in some of his writings, was that the Europeans were going beyond what was originally agreed upon in terms of how they were going to engage in slave trade. And he was saying that they were doing it too forcefully and too violently and too excessively, more than what they had agreed upon. But the Congolese kings did agree to slavery, and then the Europeans went even beyond what they agreed to and were enslaving more and more. So many Congolese people, which again was a Christian kingdom, ended up in slave ships and came over to the Americas. And so many, not just in the United States, but yes, in the United States. I mean, if y'all have been in New Orleans, you got Congo Square right there in New Orleans. That's where African people used to congregate and gather. Many, if not most, of those Congolese Christians were Congolese people were Christians, because they were from a Christian kingdom. And so you even see that as evidence. There's evidence for that, not only from the Congo, but even in the Americas. There's evidence in African-American grave sites in different parts of the United States. There's evidence in European writings of seeing African people congregating and gathering and worshiping Jesus Christ. And there's even practices in Black communities in the Americas, even to this day, in places like Brazil.
Do me a favor. I had to step away for a minute. Comeback King says, so why do we follow a European form of Christianity? Explain what you mean and how it differs. Explain what you mean, brother. How you follow a European form of Christianity. Who you talking about specifically? Pentecostal, Baptist? Who? Explain what you mean by that.
Brazil and in Puerto Rico and Haiti, and even in the southeastern United States, of Black communities who have retained much of the Congolese spirituality and culture that came over. And one of the strongest examples of this is actually in one of the slave revolts in the United States, which was the Stono Rebellion in, I think, 1739, I believe it was, in the 1730s, where there were slaves who were trying to escape South Carolina and go into Florida, which was under Spanish control at that time. And Spanish had offered freedom to any Africans who had escaped slavery under the British controlled colonies at that time. And there was this slave revolt, much like Nat Turner's revolt, but also what's unique about this slave revolt called the Stono Rebellion was that it was actually started by Congolese people. There were evidence and documented text from that time period that said the slave revolt was originally started by Congolese Christians who spoke Portuguese, which made sense because of their contact with the Portuguese. And by
Wait a minute, Christians rebelling? Wait a minute, Christians rebelling? Let me leave these folk alone, because somebody gonna say they in sin. Why would you rebel? Be happy in the state that you're in.
By the 1700s, Congo actually was under Portuguese colonization. And so it would make sense that they would have been speaking Portuguese, but also that they were practicing Christianity even before they came over on the slave ships, and that their Christian faith led them to actually fight for freedom. And in fact, the witnesses around that time that witnessed that slave revolt said that the Congolese Christians were shouting in Portuguese, crying for freedom, and they were waving swords around and playing drums. And this is actually in the same vein as you see documents and pictures of Portuguese people who visited the Congo, seeing them doing similar dances and practices and chant and the waving of weapons and the playing of drums. This was a Congolese Christian.
I'm a little worried right now. So why didn't European Christians recognize their quote-unquote Christian brothers in Africa? Who said that they didn't? European Christians over here said these Christian brothers and sisters in some bondage over here, they got to be free. There was even freer folk that weren't Christian because they said this child slavery is wrong and it's against the book. Them was all Christians. You forgot Christians led this thing out. Fair use. I see a lot of people got one side of the history. That's that YouTube side of the history.
Christian tradition called a sangamento in Portugal, in Portuguese. And this practice of sangamentos came over, and Cecile Fremont is a art historian from Yale University who's done a lot of great books and work on this this topic of how Congolese Christianity came over in the slave ships and survived and continued to persist all in North America, South America, and the Caribbean as well.
Yeah, thank you for that. Something I found very profound about listening to you speak with the Jude 3 project was you were talking about that the Islamic sources you would looked into had you understanding that there was Christians, Jews, and even Muslims that came off the slave ships and whatnot, right? In varying numbers, etc. But like I thought that to be extremely powerful, particularly when you brought up the Stoner Rebellion, because that's real and tangible for a lot of people and whatnot, right? But that also points to an aspect of Christianity that I don't think a lot of African Americans know about, which is like Gullah Geechee Christianity and Low Country Christianity in that same area from the Carolinas to Georgia, whatnot. And to that end, this will be my last question because I know I gotta let you go, whatnot. I'm gonna ask the question, but I'm also gonna like show a presentation, show a couple slides after I ask the question. What are your thoughts on there potentially being evidence for Ethiopian, Congolese, and Sahelian Christian influence on the first African Baptist church in Savannah, Georgia, and Gullah Geechee Christianity? So real quick, the First African Baptist Church is the oldest African American church in the country. And I'm gonna make this bigger right quick. Do this. So to that end, to what you were talking about earlier in terms of that Christian kingdom that the people of Mali were mentioning, that was the Christian kingdom of Takrur, which is in Senegal, northern Senegal, southern Mauritania, etc. And again, I was talking about the Ghana Empire, etc. Whatnot. We know that there was a lot of people that came within the first wave of slavery into specifically North America and in the Low Country, whatnot, that came from these areas and whatnot, right? And what's interesting is at this the First African Baptist Church, it was originally called the Ethiopian Baptist Church of Jesus Christ back in the 1850s and whatnot, right? I had a very good friend of mine who went down there a couple of times and took some tours and whatnot. And he told me that they gave this narrative that they originally had Ethiopian crosses in their window panes and whatnot, but they eventually later on turned into more westernized crosses and whatnot, right? This is a place where they have Congolese cosmograms drilled into the floors that they say that they used to help slaves breathe when they were using them when they were trying to help them run away from in the Underground Railroad and whatnot, right? Not only do they have Congolese cosmograms, they also have and again, touching on the Ethiopic side, because I think what a lot of people don't recognize is that there were 542,000 slaves taken from East Africa in the slave trade. There are slaves taken from West Africa, etc., whatnot. But this church potentially has fingerprints from Christianity from East Africa, West Africa, like Southwest Africa, like Congo, and also the Sahel. So, for instance, in a concept of something that potentially could connect to East Africa, they made like the people of the church made a wooden replica of what could be considered like the Ark of the Covenant, etc., made out of acacia wood. Dr. Ephraim Isaac in a 2016 documentary, and I'm definitely going to have you take a look at this real soon, real quick before you leave. He potentially identified some Ge'ez characters, like Ge'ez Ha and Sa, on multiple pews. There is history in Savannah, Georgia, of slaves in the 1850s writing gospels in the Arabic script, right? Like signifying that they might have come from the Sahel, etc. Whatnot, but they're writing the Gospel of John. The first time the Gullah language is written down is used to write the Gospel of John, but using the Arabic script to write it, from a Mandingo slave named London in Savannah, Georgia. We can see in Gullah Christianity that they have certain things that are very unique to their Christianity, like just like you were talking about with the Ethiopian tradition, like river baptisms, etc. Whatnot, right? And even specific songs that they sing during those baptisms, like that they're going down to the River Jordan. But with that said, what are your thoughts on those potential connections to and the importance of there potentially being a place that could touch on all aspects of the slave trade, but also the Christianity coming from East Africa, Southwest Africa, and the Sahel, etc.?
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible, and I think it'll be really important for some scholarship to be done, like in terms of philology and archaeology on First African Church, because there's a lot of interesting possibilities about the inscriptions and that have emerged there, and different people have had different ideas about what language that what time period that could have come from. And so I think there really needs to be more work done from the perspective of archaeology and philology on that, and because we know absolutely that Christians and Muslims and Jews from different parts of the continent were brought over, and that places like Savannah and South Carolina, that was really the kind of the hotbed of various African cultures, many of whom had contact with Ethiopian speaking and Arabic speaking people. And so I think it's definitely a possibility that it could represent a connection. And I think there needs to be a lot more scholarly work done and some publications put out on this on this question.
So you're the only person other than Ephraim Isaac that I know of that I could reach out to that could potentially read Ge'ez. And I believe you said you recently learned classical Arabic as well.
That's right.
So real quick, I'm going to put up a picture on the screen from some pews and whatnot, and I just want to get your quick take. Do you think there's any? I believe the portions that are in the red are the portions that Dr. Ephraim Isaac said. Let me take this question off. That he said he believed could be a Ge'ez Ha and Sa. Do you see any potential connection with that or no?
It's possible. Yeah, it's possible. And just as a heads up, I do got to get to my next meeting. We're over time, but
Yes,
it's definitely possible because the head in is like a kind of in a U shape, and so that could be what that is, or it could be something else entirely. It could be like you had another slide up that is thinking that it could be some Arabic letters, and also there's another question of when did these inscriptions come from, and what and also what does the textual evidence show us about in the 18th century? What were people writing from this church about? So it's very possible that it could be.
So I appreciate you. I'll let you know. I'll let you go. I know we're over time. So if you got to go, you can just jet. I'm gonna show your books one more time and let people know where they can find you. Where can people reach you on social media?
Yeah, you can definitely hit me up. I'm on Facebook, Vince Bantu. There's a picture of me standing in front of the Lalibela Church, and also I'm on Instagram, Mamher Bantu, MAMHER. Bantu, Mamher Bantu, and then also I'm on Twitter, Hustle, Bantu Hustle, STL capital, rep for St. Louis. And also definitely hit me up on the website, Meacham School of Hymenot, and you can see things that are going on. We have a trip coming up to, we're praying for peace. We're trying to go to Sudan, but if not, we're going to go to Ethiopia in February. And then also we have a conference coming up in Chicago. I noticed you have the Hymenot Journal up, and that's a conference for Afrocentric theology, academic theology in Chicago, but you can also attend virtually, and that'll be in October. So you can definitely hit me up at those events and other events we have coming up on our website for the Meacham School of Hymenot. So I appreciate just this conversation and look forward to further ones.
Yes, sir. Appreciate you for your work and appreciate you for your time. So people, if you want to tune in to more of what he has to say, like I said, check out the description box below. I have links for his presentations on North African Christianity, Coptic Christianity, Nubian Christianity, and Ethiopian Christianity, as well as a link to all these books that you see on the screen. So thank you very much for your time, brother, man.
Okay, thank you, brother. Yeah, all right.
Peace and blessings. About to leave y'all with a song to
I have to say that was good. That was very enlightening.